Good morning, boys and girls. So today we are not going to be taking any notes. However, we are going to be looking at a reading passage today about the North Carolina Constitution. There have been 3 constitutions from North Carolina. They all started back in 1776. It was revised in 1868 and then changed again in 1971. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few things this morning with each of these constitutions. I'm going to be using some highlighters to go through the text. If you want to grab a highlighter and follow along with me, that'd be great. We're just going to highlight some important information about these 3 constitutions. So first and foremost, some words to know, because we'll talk about these a little bit later as well. Revision is to change or alter. To change or alter. So when they made revisions to the Constitution, they changed them in order to fit with how things were changing in the world itself, in North Carolina itself. The next one we're going to talk about is the amendment, is the act of changing for the better. We're going to talk about a few amendments that happened after 1776 as well as after 1868 when the new constitutions were created and what was changed for the better. So one thing that we are going to talk about is the African American right to vote, that they can own property, all of that stuff. So that'll be some things that we talk about today, as well as some women's rights as well. The Constitution is the highest legal document for the state of North Carolina. We are going to underline that fact. It is the highest legal document for the state of North Carolina. So yesterday when we talked about the United States Constitution, there is a court called the Supreme Court. The United States Constitution is their highest legal document for all of the United States. The North Carolina Constitution is the highest legal document for us. The first North Carolina Constitution was created in 1776 after the United States Declaration of Independence. Since the first state constitution, there have been 2 major revisions, new constitutions, and many amendments. Okay, so again, throughout history, we've had our 3 constitutions: 1776, 1868, and 1971. The first North Carolina Constitution was the Constitution of 1776, after we declared our independence from the tyrant King George. Congress passed into law the first Constitution in December 1776. This draft also included a Declaration of Rights, kind of like our Bill of Rights we talked about yesterday. This Constitution had 3 branches of government, and that's what we're going to get into a little bit later as well this week. But the General Assembly, that legislative branch, held the most power. That's going to change as we go through this information. At this time, only male landowners over the age of 21 could become a member and vote in the General Assembly. And they were the only state officials elected by the people. The General Assembly picked judges, the governor, and other important members of government. That's going to change as well. That'll be an amendment that we get to later, of how that governor especially is brought into office. Judges could serve their whole life, but governors could only serve 1 year. The governor had strict term limits. A person could only hold the office 3 terms in every 6 years. The governor had very little power at this time. So even though the governor of North Carolina, he was one of our main leaders, he did not have a lot of power. He was more just there to be there, to make a few decisions here and there. But again, that legislative branch made the most decisions. The Constitution established a judicial branch, but did not well define the branch's structure. The Constitution also lacked a system of local government. So when we first declared our independence, yes, we put the Constitution into place. It had rules, had laws, said who was in charge. It was not very structured. It was not held up very well. Okay, so we'll move on to our next page. Okay, yours will be right beside it. A state constitutional convention was called in 1835. Out of the convention came many amendments. Among those changes were, so again, the amendments is what's been changing for the better. Okay, so they fixed the membership of the Senate and House to their present levels, which is 50 senators and 120 representatives. This has not changed since 1835. The governor became popularly elected by a vote of North Carolina citizens and given a 2-year term instead of 1. This is still true today. All voting rights were taken away from African Americans. Okay, so we were still in the process of, yes, slavery was ending. However, they still did not want African Americans to hold a lot of power, to have a lot of decision making. So yes, they were free. However, they didn't have the same votes, same rights as other people did in North Carolina. The changes were passed by a vote of the people on November 9th, 1835. Okay, 1835. I'm going to go ahead and change my color highlighter real quick because that's all we need to know about our first Constitution. Okay, the second Constitution is going to be after the Civil War. I know we have yet to talk about the Civil War. We're going to get to Civil War after our government unit. Okay, I promise it's coming. Alrighty, friends. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to read this first paragraph together, and then we're going to go and highlight around it because there's a lot of important information. After the Civil War, there were several unsuccessful attempts to change the Constitution. In 1868, a second Constitution was adopted, and it drastically changed North Carolina government. The new Constitution gave more power to the people and the governor. For the first time, all major state and local officers were elected by the people, and all men, regardless of race or property qualifications, were eligible to vote and to hold office. The governor was now elected for a 4-year term rather than for 2 years, and his authority was increased. The justices of the Supreme Court and judges of the Superior Court were elected to 8-year terms. The ability to tax North Carolina citizens was given to the General Assembly. You no longer had to own property to vote, and it also called for the creation of free public schools for North Carolinians between the ages of 6 and 21, as well as state prisons and charitable institutions. Slavery in North Carolina was also abolished and ended. Yay! So after that Civil War, when Mr. Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, gave his address, slavery was officially abolished. So we're going to go ahead and highlight all around this because these are all changes that came about with this second Constitution. They're all significant. Okay, we'll need to go back to those a little bit later, in just a few minutes. Some people hated the new Constitution because it gave power to black people, reduced the power of wealthy landowners, and increased the political role of poor whites. Most blacks and poorer whites were illiterate, and many people protested that, as a result, their votes could easily be bought. With being illiterate means they can't read very well. They don't understand it very well. The Constitution of 1868 was amended or changed many times between 1870 and 1875. These amendments gave the power back to the General Assembly. So again, they got more power back, took it away from the governor, and took power away from the courts and local government. They also created a system of segregation, which is the separation of blacks and whites. Okay, we need to know that word. In which African Americans were given less rights. A majority of the changes of the Constitution in 1868 remained intact until 1971, about 100 years later. It's a long time. And much of the language of that document remains in the state constitution today. Another state constitutional convention was called in 1875. Out of the convention came more amendments. Among those changes were, and we're going to go ahead and just highlight these bullet points going down. Okay, so we don't have to highlight everything. Legislators' salaries were set and not to be changed. Racial segregation was established as separate but equal. North Carolina Supreme Court was reduced to 3 judges. Legislature was given control over local, county, and city governments. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and keep this highlighter out for just another minute, and then I'll switch to my last color with the third Constitution, because there's another thing in here before the Constitution of 1971. From 1869 through 1968, 97 amendments were brought to North Carolina citizens for a vote. Of the 97 amendments, 69 were passed by voters. 69 of those. So due to those amendments and how many got passed, Much of the Constitution of 1868 had become outdated and difficult to read. The Constitution of 1971 began with a study into the needed changes that would improve the language of the Constitution and make it easier to read and understand. The Constitution was written by making mainly small changes to clean up and clarify the text. The draft organized topics and left out unneeded sections. The language was also updated. On November 3rd, 1970, the proposed Constitution of 1971 was approved by a vote of North Carolina citizens. Since the Constitution of 1971, there have been over 20 amendments. Fortunately, the majority of these amendments gives more rights to citizens. The following are significant amendments made since the 1971 Constitution. Citizens could no longer be taxed to vote. A state income tax was created on the same basis as a federal income tax. The governor and lieutenant governor gained the right to serve 2 consecutive terms. So that goes back to what our votes just happened, what our election just happened. So Mr. Cooper got voted into office again. So he's in his 2nd term now. The state was required to operate in a balanced budget. All judges were required to be lawyers. Segregation, separation of blacks and whites, was ended. Victim rights were added to the Declaration of Rights, and the governor was given the power to vote. Alrighty, boys and girls. So after we have all of this information highlighted, you do have 10 questions we're going to be working on today. But if you stayed with me with highlighting, we talked about where all of your answers could be found. The majority of them are multiple choice, so just make sure you answer slowly and make sure you read the information that we talked about carefully. There is 2 fill in the blanks. So on number 7, it tells you on page 2, we talked about these several revisions drastically changed North Carolina government when the 2nd Constitution was written in 1868. Below, list 3 that you think were the most important changes to our government. So you only need to list 3 out of all of the ones that we highlighted in that really big paragraph. Okay. The other one that is a write-in is talking about how many of those 97 amendments were passed. We just talked about that one, okay? Alrighty, friends, so go ahead and answer these. When you're done, make sure you turn in your assignment. If you have any questions, please let me know.